Welcome, everyone. We're glad to have you on behalf of the Kahua team. We appreciate your time today. I am joined today by some fabulous guests with great experience in this space. So let me ask them to all come back in. And I will start by asking this team to introduce themselves. Rich, will you go first? Tell us who you are. Tell us about your organization, a little bit about your role there.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks, Nicholas. It's great to be here. So my name is Rich Warner. I'm a partner at Deloitte. I lead our tech enablement practice within capital projects. So we specialize a lot with PMIS implementations. Just a quick background on me. I've got maybe a unique perspective on PMIS systems in the sense that the first third of my career I worked for the EPCM. So I was doing a lot of design, construction of mining projects. I was the guy in the trailer, and back then I was also the guy making the access databases and all these really fancy spreadsheets doing cost control, et cetera. And as PMIS solutions got better on the market, we'd buy a system, we'd implement it, et cetera. Then I also have an SI background, so I transitioned from EPCM into the professional services world and professionalized the hobby of finding construction software and started implementing that for clients. And I've also been on the owner side where I was the sponsor of a big PMIS system implementation. So I've got a few different backgrounds that has evolved my thinking when it comes to people and process over the years.
Rich, we're glad you're with us. Appreciate your time today and the input that you have in this topic. When we talk about people, process, and technology, I can't think of a better guy to do it. So thanks for being with us. David McGid, introduce yourself to our audience and tell them a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thank you, Nicholas. Also very happy to be with you guys today. So my name is David McGid. I'm the VP of Professional Services at Kahua. So I lead the organization that does the implementation of our product. I'm fortunate to be one of the original co-founders of Kahua. So I've been with the organization since the beginning. And I have about 25 years of experience in the construction IT space. My background is in civil engineering, but I've spent the majority of my career helping implement technology.
David, you and I met in 2001, 2002?
Around that time.
Yeah, David was a kind of fresh out of school. I guess you'd been out a couple of years at that point, David, or was Constructware the first job you had coming out of Georgia Tech?
It was not. So I did a little bit of work in the design space, a little bit of work for development. So I have a background in the construction space and construction management, but I quickly decided that I wanted to do something a little bit different. And I've spent the majority of my career, again, implementing PMIS systems.
And after that first company, David, you went out on your own for a while, didn't you?
That's correct.
Had your own company doing this kind of work. And then when the Constructware founders, that first company that Scott Unger, Brian Moore had founded, when they decided to do it again, you were one of the first calls they made, and you're on that initial founder team at Kahua.
Yeah, so I tell people I was in the right place at the right time, but yeah. It's
Excellent, excellent. All right, Stephen, tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Stephen Perez. I am a PMIS consultant for Compass Consults. We are a project management service company. Offer our clients a range of different services dealing with project management, implementation, claims, controls, all types of good stuff like that. My background is I was kind of like everybody else. I've worked in the PMIS realm for about 10 years now, in the private side and in the public side. Most recently, I worked with Nicholas here for GSA, working on implementing Kahua throughout all of GSA in Washington, D.C.
Excellent. Stephen, so glad you're with us, man. I'm glad you're with Compass Consult now. Tell us, I think everybody could easily find Deloitte or Kahua. If they wanted to find Compass Consult after this conversation is over, website they can go to?
Yeah, it's very simple, compassconsult.co. You can go there. We have a range of services that we offer. We have we're based out of Australia, and here in the United States, we're based out of California. So we do a lot of work internationally all over the place. So we have
all right, .co, not .com.
Correct, .co.
All right, excellent. All right, well, guys, I'm really glad you're here. This is a conversation that you each have some really unique experience to bring to this table. So glad you're here. I know the audience is going to benefit a lot from this. So let's just jump right in. Nicholas or Rich, I want to start with you. You've been in the consulting space for a long time. So I want to ask, when did you first hear that phrase, people, process, and technology? And what did you think of it when you heard it? And what do you think of it now after practicing this trade for quite a while?
Yeah, I'll tie this a little bit to my background. So the first, call it 10 years of my career when I was out in those construction trailers, right? I was doing monthly reports, a lot of cost control. It was painful, right? It was very repetitive. And when it was very manual, we were looking for any system to implement. And at that point, I mean, it was really for, like, I was implementing for me and for our team. So I was really technology focused, didn't really think much about, the people and process side. And I was really just tech oriented. Let me find something that automates this thing, speeds things up, and go from there. And I carry that a little bit. And when I actually entered consulting the first time, we talked a lot about people, process, technology, and honestly, I thought it was pretty useful framework in terms of how to, categorize different deliverables and different aspects of the project and that. But I still wasn't totally bought into it. I still thought the best tech is probably the way to go. And honestly, like when we would price jobs, change management typically would be the first thing that gets the budget slashed, right? And even clients, a lot of the clients we had wouldn't be, if they hadn't been through a transformation before or hadn't seen the results of focusing on people and process, they would be okay with that. But then ironically, the first thing that, clients and the team asks for by the time you get to go live is, geez, we wish we had more change management, right? And we saw that time and time again. But I think for me, the real eye opener when I was on the client side, and just to give a little bit of context here, the client was relatively financial difficulties. There's about a 300 million capital plan. We had to figure out how to be more productive as an organization and do more with the same, basically, right? We had to find more hours in the day to just be more effective at doing the projects. So we went through a process, to select, and what we thought was we selected the best tech, right? It was a leading project controls, cost control solution. It's been implemented before many places. It's been implemented well. So we thought this was going to be, the silver bullet to really professionalize our capital projects organization. But it was really tech focused. And what happened was we didn't talk to the project managers on site, or really, like we kind of told them a little bit what was coming. We didn't really spend a lot of time communicating the benefits, how it was going to look. We just assumed we were going to scrap all the ways of working that people were doing on site and just get them into this new beautiful cost control solution that had all this fancy capabilities with earned value and things like that. So and we did the project well, right? Like at that point, I was sort of used to, for my consulting days, like we got to get to go live on time, on budget. But what I realized on the owner side was the real fun began the day after go live. And then it was all about adoption. But unfortunately on this one, it was super tough because as the users got on, they came in and they started going through the training, they realized, well, these processes built in, it's a lot harder to do this than my spreadsheet. I can do a ton of things real fast in my spreadsheet. This is real hard. And we'd start getting comments like, do I need to hire someone now just to use the system, right? And that's kind of the reverse, right? So at that stage, we realized like, okay, process isn't landing. Maybe this thing is a bit more complex. And we're now having to retroactively do the change management where, we would have slides trying to tell them this is what's changing, this is why it's good for you. But doing it retroactively, not bringing the team along for the journey, basically killed adoption. So this thing hobbled along for a number of months, and ultimately we pulled the pin on it and sort of reverted back to just templatizing Excel, upgrading enhancements to our ERP, et cetera. And at that point, though, that was the real sort of, we'll say, pivotal shift of where I realized it's the best tech, and it's exactly what this thing is titled, like the best tech alone, which is what we thought we had, wasn't going to do it if you don't really pay attention to the people and the process side all the way through, starting, even before you pick the tech.
So after go live, from the end user's perspective, IT or corporate comes in and tells me, these are your words, Rich, this is why it's good for you, as opposed to feeling like I was part of the process. I can see why that's not well received. So, and your users said this is harder. Stephen, David, did you ever hear after a deployment of something, the end users complaining this is harder? This, do I have to hire somebody to use this system?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And what was the scope of well, I'll come back to this, Stephen. I wanted to ask you about the scope of the deployment at the GSA, but
I can talk about another deployment that we worked on if you want.
Well, just if it rings true that, I remember reading, I think it was Dr. Spencer Johnson. I think he's the guy that wrote Who Moved My Cheese? And I remember reading that as a salesperson when I had started a sales career. And that was after I'd moved out of a consulting career. That's when David and I were working together. I was moving into sales and he was moving into this implementation group. And I remember reading this as a salesperson. I'm not sure why the VP of sales had us all read Who Moved My Cheese, but I remember thinking this would have been really helpful when I was in the role that David has, to talk about change management and to help people understand kind of I always like to borrow from Simon Sinek, the why and what we're doing here, as opposed to just picking the best tool and, assuming that everybody's going to love that and go with that. So just again, David, does that echo from any of your experiences?
Absolutely. And I agree with a lot of Rich's comments. And when I think about your original question, like when did I first hear and what did I think about it? Probably a similar path as Rich is, coming from a technology background, as a young consultant, my goal was, technology. Here is the technology. Here's how you use it. I'm going to train you. I'm going to set you up and you're going to love it. So that was my approach. And I guess as I evolved, I maybe thought, well, I can do better if I come up with better processes, but I was never really thinking as much about the people. And I'd say as maybe I've evolved over time, I've maybe flipped my mindset to where, people is the main critical factor in making a project successful. Again, if I'd heard that term 25 years ago, I would have thought, well, that's kind of fluffy. That makes people feel good. Those are the services that, the likes of Deloitte get paid a lot for, but, it's not for me. But the more, I've been in these projects and seen how these things get implemented, you made the comment, move my cheese. If I moved your cheese and replaced it with a better piece of cheese, you still may not want it or still may not like it. So I think, over time, you really do have to focus on the people. You really have to understand their incentives, understand the change management process. Again, you could replace the cheese with a better piece of cheese, but if you didn't tell the people along the way or make them feel comfortable with that transition, they still may not like it. So there's definitely been an evolution. I mean, I think now all three of those parts are very critical, but I think more and more people now understand that there's definitely needs to be more focus on the people aspect of technology implementations and how change management affects the success of your overall project.
Yeah. Totally. I think the if you build it, they will come approach doesn't always work with tech implementations.
Yeah. Well, guys, I promise we're going to finish this webinar, before the hour's over, and it's going to be on a lot of positive notes. But at this time, I want to ask if I can, if we can get dirty for a minute. And Rich, I'll come back to you. You gave a bit of an example. If you've got more detail or if you've got another example, but I want to ask each of you, can you help us kind of set the stage as to what we want to avoid by telling us about a time when you implemented a technology and it failed, when the initiative failed because the people or the process weren't right or they weren't ready? So I know it's an ugly question. Nobody likes talking about their failures, but I'd like for you each to offer up some advice about a failure, or just tell us a story about a failure that failed because, again, the people weren't ready or the process wasn't right. Be as specific as you can. We don't want to embarrass anybody, of course, but tell us what you can about that deployment. And Rich, do you want to add anything to what you said before? If you got a different story, I'll start with you and then ask David and Stephen to pipe in.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit, I think, to the previous story from the mining company. So it's a little bit like what you said, the why. right? I find
Yeah.
a lot of implementations don't ask that question, like why are we actually implementing a system? Because you really gotta nail that point, and it totally changes the scope. It changes the governance. It changes just about every aspect of that implementation. And I'll give a couple of examples. If you ask the why and it turns out we want to do the system implementation because we need to replace a legacy system, we want to remove some business continuity risk, and we're going to reprogram old process into the new system, you then kind of know what it's all about. You can form governance around it. Um, you can sort of scope your process around that, et cetera. And it's going to probably take a lot more configuration and a lot less change management because everyone's kind of doing the same thing in the new system. That's one way to sort of go. The other way it could be is we want to scrap what people are doing and we want to go out of the box using leading functionality and capability of this new PMIS. It's going to add capability. We're going to be slick and more efficient, et cetera. That basically then tells you you may not have as much configuration, but you're going to have a whole heap of change management because you're effectively changing the way folks are working. So some thought going into that ahead of implementation is critical. And it's not just to sort of wordsmith the objective of the project, but really to get organizational alignment in terms of like, why are we doing this? And at the project that we did at the mining client, we didn't do that, right? It was basically skipped, and it sounded like we needed a system. I mean, everyone else had systems. It's going to make us more efficient. Let's go for it. But we totally underestimated the change management component of it.
Yeah, David, any kind of not horror story, but any story of a failed initiative that you
Yeah,
can
I
share
mean,
with us?
it's interesting that I've also got a mining company in mind. I'm pretty sure it's not the same one that Rich was talking about, but very recently we actually had an opportunity with a company that was looking to contract with us for a project. And during the scoping exercise, we always like to kind of understand what the project's about and what they're looking to do. And we got pretty close to a contract signature, and we scheduled a couple extra meetings with some of the field staff, and we got into some very interesting discussions about how our technology handles transmittals. And when you think about a construction transmittal, and I think about my history in PMIS, back in the early days, the construction transmittal was probably the number one document type for volume because when PMIS first came out, we were digitizing construction processes, and the construction transmittal was the number one thing. It was a proof of transmission of something before there was electronic transmission.
Right.
I'd say over the last 20 years, the usage of a transmittal has plummeted because it's not really relevant anymore, because now with electronic transmissions, there's other ways to understand how you transmit things. But this particular customer was really wanting to auger in on how we produce transmittals, and we tried to kind of convince them that with the advent of this type of technology, that's not as big of a process. But so they were really looking for us to basically, in my opinion, go back in time and use technology kind of in a weird way to basically do something inefficiently. And we tried to help hold to our guns, and we decided not to go into an agreement together. So it's a failure in that we weren't able to help this customer. But at the end of the day, I just knew that our technology and our consulting services weren't going to make a breakthrough with this organization. And kind of just speaks to, again, sometimes people are not ready for a technology if their goal is to simply replicate, in my opinion, very old processes into a new technology.
So this is the story of trying to put really good technology on a really bad process.
Basically, yes.
And we were wise enough to say, this is not going to be a successful endeavor. Let's step away before we all hate each other.
Absolutely.
So, Stephen?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a different outlook, because when I started off in the industry, I was on the people side. So I showed up to work one day and my boss were like, hey, we have this new PMIS situation that we're going to start implementing. So here you go, make it happen, put it on all your projects. So I was kind of on the other side of what David was explaining. They did all the background investigation and work. Everybody came up with their whys, we're going to do it, and they just rolled it out to the team. So it was our job to try to implement it. So, my boss sat us down. We had a whole bunch of training. I understood the system. It wasn't too bad. But a lot of my other colleagues struggled with it because it was different than what they were used to. There was, buttons now, there was places to put stuff. So it was them not understanding, like you guys were saying, what's the why? Why are we doing this? I'm perfectly fine with Excel for my spreadsheets. I have Microsoft Word if I need to type up these things. I have my templates here. I have an old clipboard that I keep all my documents in. There's no need for me to do this if my system works. So it was our boss having to now go back and sit down and kind of field these questions and answer it. Hey, this is why this is important. This is why we need it. And it took a long time. I mean, it was longer than normal. And even towards the end of the year, because we started at the beginning of the year, towards the end of the year, there was still reluctance to use the PMI system because they felt like it was redundant work sometimes, or just didn't work the same. This was a private industry, so as long as work was getting done and the clients were happy, nobody was really pushing too hard for the PMI implementation. But eventually, everybody got on board. The new generation came through. We trained them up on the system, and it turned into a success. But in the beginning, it was a real struggle because they focused so much on the technology, and that someone had sold them and said, "Hey, this is the great thing for your company. You want to go into the future. This is what you need." And didn't really talk to the people on the ground about how it's going to be implemented, what tools were going to be needed. Can you do it virtually? Can I do it from my phone? There was all these different hurdles that had to be leaped over. So eventually,
Stephen,
it worked out.
You don't want to wait a generation for your initiative to be successful. So what would you have done different if you went back, if you were in charge of that rollout and could go back and redo it? What would you have done differently?
Well, I think the most important thing is, finding out why are we doing this? Is the legacy PMI system that we're using not able to keep up with the technology that's our clients are needing, or our customers are using, or our teams is used to using? Is Excel the best? Is Kahoot the best? Can Kahoot grow with us? Is there changes that we need that we can bring to the team that's not currently servicing us? Because if you're looking for a new system, there's something that's not happening with your current system. So I think had they sat down with our project managers and our project execution team and even support staff and said, this is something that we'd like to do, let's talk about it, and this is why. I think we need this because of X. And then I heard everybody talk about it. Then, like Richard was saying, everybody will be part of the team, part of the decision. Then when it actually rolls out, it's like, we've already talked about it. We've already agreed that this is the thing. We've already seen your implementation process broken down into, the next 6 months on how we're going to do this. In the beginning, it's going to be the crawl phase of, learning about the system, and then the walk phase with someone holding your hand to making sure you understand the full system, to the run phase where you'll just have support, in case you need it. I think that's how you implement something is just as important as the why, and making sure that your people also understand how it's going to revolutionize or even, change your industry or change your work. You don't want to have someone who's working, 20-hour days just because they don't understand the system. They're sitting there scratching their head trying to figure out where the button's at. Then that's not productivity. You're losing that time. So
you would have spent more time, more emphasis on the people part up front.
Yeah, correct. I think the people part for me would come first, and then out of the three, I would rank it people first, technology second, and then process last.
David, you've been, kind of dedicated to these kind of deployments, for most of the last couple of decades, and even longer than that, actually. Was there ever a time when you really thought that the tech could overcome the culture or the process, only to be disappointed by the humans involved?
Probably more times than I want to admit. And like I said, I think a lot of times, coming from a technology background, you're obviously always proud of your technology, and you think that it can solve all problems. But at the end of the day, again, you've got to put yourself in other people's shoes. Like Stephen was saying, like we might have the best tech, we might have come up with the best process, but if also the way one project manager works might be different than another. So one of the things that we always try to do, or we try to advise, is when we get into these implementations, we need to have the right team of people, and we need to have a broad enough group of people contributing. The more contribution you can get, communication you can get with the end users up front, even if they don't love everything that you developed, and they don't love every process, if they feel like they've been part of the process all along, it goes a long way into buy-in at the end of the process.
Excellent. All right. I did promise we were going to get to a positive note, and we're going to get there right now. So I want to ask, this is an open question for each of you, for all of you. Can you tell me about a time, just one of the times in your career where you got the people and the process and the technology aligned just right? And what were the results? This is kind of a moment to brag. So,
Yeah, so
Rich
I
will go
can
first.
start.
Okay.
Yeah, I can start this one. So yeah, I'm pretty convinced there's a bit of a recipe of things to do on these PMIS implementations even before the technology is selected, right? And we talked about the why piece. I'm not gonna keep going down on the why, but to go a little bit further, I think it's also important to really understand and try and quantify the benefits that one is trying to achieve with these implementations, and that can take on many forms. I mean, it can be like compliance, it could be efficiency gains, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think spending the time to work out what the value is you expect to get from these implementations is important. Someone will ask you on the back end if you've achieved those benefits, those quick wins, and you don't want to try and retroactively sort that. So it just goes more into the thinking of, what are we really going to get out of implementing this as an organization? So I think that part is also important. The third piece I think is important is to spend a little bit of time focusing on your end-to-end process. If you don't have it, develop it, spend a little bit of time trying to stitch it through, because this will represent basically the scope that ultimately gets codified in a PMIS. It'll already be something you can sort of see to see, okay, there's inefficiencies here, we're probably going to work on there. And you may not know all the details, but even before the technology is selected, you know where you're going to be focusing on as part of process redefinition, et cetera, et cetera. So I think clients that or any organization that does those, call it 3 steps up front, before technology is selected, are already off to a good start. And when you do that as well, especially on the end-to-end process side, it also informs what the governance could look like. You may realize as you're going through that this part of the process is owned by this part of the organization and this is part of that. So it really starts shaping how you want the program to be governed, who's going to be making decisions. And again, all of these sort of things can be done even before you select the technology. And it's impressive when we show up to clients that they've already worked this out. It feels like easy button now for the rest of this. But I think it's mission critical. When you get into the project, I tend to find clients that are the most successful are the ones that first get trained on the technology, do like the tutorials, enough of the like either the online or the offered training of an application, just so they can really participate in workshops and sort of be up to speed on it. You don't want to have people coming into workshops that have never seen the tool, don't really know how to provide input. It's a bit blind leading the blind in that case. So I do recommend that get a requisite level of training. That just helps making the conversation so much more constructive. And in addition to that, I think the iteration process is good. Now, I'm not talking about doing like an agile implementation, but what I am talking about is as process is being redefined, as requirements are being refined, get that going in the configuration, get some minimum viable product that you can then show back to the customer. You can tweak it, you can tailor it, and you leave enough time in the implementation plan to tweak and finesse and get it to a point where it really works. You don't want to do process mapping and requirements definition on a whiteboard absent of the technology, and then try and go back to an office to configure the whole thing and do some grand reveal during UAT or some later phase in the project. 99% of the time it's not going to work. But if you do a lot of iterations, you work with the end users that are ultimately using this, do those iterations, I tend to find that's the best approach. And the clients that I've seen that do each of those items, these things, what it leads to is no surprises by the time you get to go live. Everyone knows what to expect. UAT is in essence a rubber stamp, and you generally go live as planned. And if you pre-plan that with the right governance, the right level of iteration, the right training, I think these are all the sort of recipe component, the ingredients here to a successful implementation.
Steve and David, could you guys give us a particular example and what the outcome of that example?
Okay, I'll go next, and I'm actually going to brag on Steven's old company, which was the GSA. So when I think back to when people, process, technology came together on a project successfully, I think back to Kahua's implementation on the General Services Administration, and I'd love to say that it was based off of my expertise and guidance, but I honestly want to brag on GSA for making the project successful and thinking of some of these things that Rich just spoke about. They spent years planning, aligning on process, aligning on what their requirements should be. They did an excellent job of change management from day one. They had proper communication. They involved a very large implementation team. As an implementer, I get scared when there's a very large team or a very small team. They had a very large team. They gave me a matrix with over 100 names of people that were going to be engaged in the process, and I was convinced that we were doomed. But they did a great job of collaborating, getting feedback from people, but also having the necessary decision-making process from certain people. So they didn't wait on consensus for anything. But they really did a good job of again, communicating along the way, communicating the benefits, providing demonstrations, involving people, but yet keeping the project moving. And they had a dedicated change management team. That was probably one of the first times in my career where the clients themselves had a very active and engaged change management staff. They worked with our staff to put together marketing videos. They had town halls and demonstrations. And like I said, they kept people informed all along the way. It was a surprise to nobody as far as what was being implemented, when it was being implemented, and how it was going to benefit their day-to-day life. And it's not to say that everybody got exactly what they wanted, but they were consistent and good about basically taking care of the people element, and then the process and technology followed. So I was really proud of that project, and really happy with the GSA team that went along for the ride. And again, it was a true team collaboration. So it wasn't just us pushing change management on the client, but it was definitely a two-way collaboration that in a lot of ways they really helped lead.
That's a fantastic story, and gosh, one we're certainly proud of, and I want to brag a little bit more about. That was, at that time, the GSA was the largest Kahua client that we had. We took on, one of the larger organizations in North America, maybe in the world, for property management and projects. Stephen, was it like 8,000, 9,000 projects a year run through the GSA? Yeah.
That's about right.
Tens of thousands of users. David, Stephen, you guys can help me. If I remember, we have now integrated Kahua with over 20 different commercial applications inside the GSA.
There's many applications and about 24 different endpoints, but yes, it was a very, very complicated implementation, and one many years in the making. And the GSA was coming off an older PMIS system, so they had a lot of lessons learned. And so they came to the table with ready to go and understood what they were doing, and they knew what they wanted to do differently and better. And thankfully, we were the right technology at the right time, and again able to successfully bring together people process successfully.
So if I understand right, it's over 20 integrations with other applications. We've replaced about 20 commercial off-the-shelf products, point solutions, if you will, and about 20 more that were homegrown solutions. So that would be over 60 silos of data that now all talk to one system. I always contend that it's really hard to have a single source of truth, the term that people in our industry like to use, but we've certainly reduced the points where Stephen's old organization, the GSA, has to go look for information. Stephen, I hope David didn't steal your best example. I'm sure you were one of those 100 names on the matrix list. What's your success story? What's your brag point you want to share with us today?
GSA with Kahua was my brag point. It was I wasn't one of the first 100 names, but I definitely came in a little bit later in the same process as part of that team, where we had the full change management, weekly meetings on how we were going, what we were working on, what was the next step, the videos, comprehensive videos on every little thing that people needed, where you can find the help. We had websites set up for internal users and then external users that had all the videos, all the information, how to do everything step by step. It was fantastic coming into the role because I didn't start in the beginning. So when they did hire me on and I came in there to help with this change management, I sat down, I was like, oh man, am I going to have to dig through resources and find this information? Where's it all at? And they were like, there's a website. You can watch it all on YouTube. I was like, this is fantastic. This is all the information that you need. So when I would, when my project managers would reach out to me looking for help, like, hey, Steve, how do I do this? How do I do that? And send them back a quick email, and I just would link a YouTube video. Hey, right here, follow step by step. Look at time mark 2 minutes and 37 seconds. It starts talking about your issue, and you can have somebody walk it through you with screenshots of everything. You're like, this is great. We've had this the whole time. I'm like, yeah, here it is. So it was fantastic being part of that process, because it was clean. Like you said, there was a buy-in from our stakeholders that were streamline the process. There wasn't any fighting. There was like, hey, this is what we're working on, this is what we're doing. Everybody knew about it ahead of time. They sent out timelines and briefings. They knew it was coming up. If anybody wanted a demo beforehand, we would demo things for them. So if any of the project managers had questions, comments, concerns, they would send it back to us. And we would, put it out there to Kahua, and Kahua would work their magic, and we'd come back with a happy solution. So it was one of the best implementations I did for PMI system.
That's fantastic. And I love David's perspective on that, how it was scary for us. I do remember, when the GSA was a new client of ours, and there were times when, Kahua was still a young, nimble, but small company, and our marketing presence was pretty small, and our marketing team was just getting ginned up. And there were plenty of times where, Kahua folks would receive a question from someone, a prospect or some interested party, and we would send them to the GSA's YouTube site to see how the GSA uses Kahua. Now, you always had to caveat that, because the GSA does it in a very specific, particular way that works for their organization, and don't think you have to do it the way the GSA does. But here's a good example of how they're using it. So that's great. It's a success story for a lot of people. So kudos to everybody. Stephen, I'll start with you, since David stole your answer last time. I'm going to start with you this time and ask.
Okay.
And you've seen this both, as that end user who had technology brought to them and said, I'm here to help you. This is going to be good for you. And then you also, as part of the GSA team, where it was really well thought out ahead of time. So how is change management different in the construction business as opposed to other industries? Do you have a perspective on that?
Well, I think change management in construction has more people. If I'm putting something into, if we're talking about like change orders, for example, a change order construction is, a legal document where we're asking for money, we're asking for funds. You're talking about time. You're talking about, all of these people who are involved and how that is going to impact them. So if there is any type of, slippage or issue, or you're talking about millions of dollars potentially, depending on the size of your project. If you're talking about a change in any other industry, such as IT, it could be as simple as a couple of keystrokes, which is still within scope. Like, hey, can you change this? They're like, yes, it's done, changed. You can't do that when I have to knock out a wall. It's not like I'm just doing it on, AutoCAD. So I think when you're talking about the construction industry versus other industries, there are those different types of intricacies that you have to consider that make it more complex, along with, all of the buy-in, because you're not just talking about 2 stakeholders or 3 stakeholders or a small amount. Like we talked about with GSA, there was at least 100 people just sitting down just for change management. And those weren't even all the stakeholders. Those are the people who were working towards the implementation, who were helping with change management, but not necessarily the ones who had like the final say on stuff. So I think construction is very people heavy when you're talking about it. So you have to take into consideration, how they're, what their perspectives are. If you have a project manager versus the team lead versus the foreman versus, the CEO of the company, the clients, how they're receiving it, their people on the ground, how they're receiving your stuff. There's a lot of people when you're talking about construction versus any other industry, really. I think it's very broad.
That's a great perspective. Our business processes, I think, probably are more complicated because there are so many more people involved. But with the caveat that all 4 of us on this call have spent most of our career in the construction space, I'll ask Rich, David, how do you feel about Stephen's answer? Would you add anything to it? Do you have any different perspective than that?
Yeah, I generally agree. I mean, if I look at it by sector, I mean, I see a lot of different behaviors across each sector. It's whether you've been through a big implementation, you have experience focusing on change management, or you don't. Like, I see the same pitfalls and good things happen across sectors. So there's a little bit of that's somewhat similar. But what I do find different and challenging is more if you look at it more from a functional perspective. So just take project controls, right? So as Deloitte, you can imagine we do a whole lot of ERP implementations. ERP implementations are typically finance, procurement, HR, and a lot of that is very process oriented. It's quite well structured, and that goes through that. But on the project control side, normally the starting point is a spreadsheet in a lot of cases, and a spreadsheet on this project looks different to a spreadsheet on that project, and everyone's spreadsheet looks different. Everyone does it a bit different. So you're coming really from quite an unstructured starting point. And the other thing is that people sometimes don't realize is there's nothing more flexible than a spreadsheet. On another scenario, you can easily do it. When you're going into a system with rules, activity before you take 2 steps forward, right? So all of that like aspect of the change management, why we're doing, what it's going to mean for you, I think is something that's sometimes underestimated when it comes from those domains. So I think that piece alone is quite unique in the construction capital projects world versus be the same.
David, any thoughts on either one of those answers?
Yeah, I think I take a slightly different approach to your question in that, when you think about change management, or you think about resistance to change, I think construction in general gets a bad rap for being either behind the times or more resistant than other similar industries. But, Stephen and Rich have kind of laid out why the construction industry is different. You basically have these one-time projects that bring a unique amount of large collaborators together to build something that will never be built again with the same group of people that will never work together again. So in some ways, I think the construction industry's come a long way. I mean, if you were to ask me this 20 years ago, I'd say, yeah, these people don't like to use computers and they're real backwards and set in their ways. But I think there's been a lot less resistance to change in the construction industry. And we've seen an explosion of different types of technologies that are now being implemented. And some of that is just, the evolution of technology. Some of it is maybe changing of the guard of newer, younger folks entering the industry. But in some ways, I'd say that construction folks are do change a lot, because every project you go to, you might be asked to do something a little bit different. You might be asked to use a new system that your company hasn't used before. So I think there has been progress. There has been a little bit change of mentality. Now you see people looking at artificial intelligence and other technologies that they think can help them. So I think there's always going to be challenges based off the simple fact that, again, people are constructing things that are unique, and unique people are coming together. But I'm at least a little bit optimistic that, that the industry is changing. Industry is becoming less resistant to the change that they know is coming their way.
I think you're right. I'm in that camp that says that the construction industry, if it was a laggard in technology, it is no longer. I believe we're leaders now. If you took someone that was on a job site 20 years ago and you propelled them to a job site today, they would not recognize the place. So I think we're actually doing a good job with adopting. David, I'm going to stay with you and ask the next question. Got a couple more, and then we're going to try to wrap it up with some audience questions. We'll do rapid fire, if you will.
Okay.
So, David, this one's to you also. Technology, as we've talked about, does not stand still. At least good technology does not stand still. So the construction business is always morphing into something new and different. I think about, materials that are being used, like these giant Lego size building blocks that people are actually building real buildings with giant Legos, or a new method like 3D printing construction, or a new regulation like allowances for EVs, or anything like that, or even restrictions on EVs in the latest administration. How do you advise your clients to stay ready for adjustments to those people, processes, and technologies we talked about in such an evolving and changing landscape?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, it's designing with the mindset that you need to be flexible and you need to be ready for change. I think one of the tenets of Cahoua when we started the company is we saw some of the limitations with some of our hard-coded old PMIS technology. And clients were always dependent on us to come up with the next innovation or the next way to change how their process works. So whenever I go into an implementation and we're working on process and design, and we always, I always like to make sure that we design things with the most flexibility and most adaptability in mind. So I never want to design a process that will be rigid or a dead end. And many of our implementations, our methodology we consider somewhat cyclical. Like we go through this process of gathering requirements, designing technology, implementing technology. But if you look at our methodology diagram, it's cyclical in nature, because when you get to the end, you always end up reassessing, redesigning, re-implementing. Most people, even when they're going through a implementation, they don't know exactly how it's going to work. They're kind of taking your word for it as you're designing the system. But once they get in there, they see things that they want to change. See things that they want to tweak. So we go into a project understanding that that's going to happen, and we try to do iterative and agile design, just so people get this mindset that what you're deciding now, you shouldn't assume that that's how you're going to do it 10 years from now, or maybe even 10 months from now. So we always kind of want to have that mindset that, what we're designing is what you're asking us to, but we want to make sure that it's a process that you can evolve with over the next 10 or 15 years.
And Rich made a similar comment about being iterative in revealing your new process, your new tech to the people that are going to be using it. Talk about it up front. This is what we all agree on, but then show them when you're 30% there and show them when you're 80% there and get feedback along the way. You're saying the same's true afterwards. Keep coming back to that. Keep revisiting.
Don't be embarrassed if the process you design is not 100% accurate when you roll it out. You should almost expect that there's going to be some tweaking to the processes that you've engineering during the implementation. So you should welcome people saying, "Wait a minute, this is not quite working well. Well, here's something we can do differently that can improve some of these processes."
Okay, excellent. Rich, anything you'd add to that?
I think two aspects to this. So I think just because of the sheer volume of infrastructure spend that's going on right now. So here in Canada, we have this whole slew of nation building infrastructure projects. We have commodity prices really high. So all these projects are within the mining space, a lot of things going on in utilities. I mean, everyone's trying to build things at the same time, but there's not an infinite pool of people to do this, right? So business cases are being put under pressure. So a lot of people are trying to work out, how do we do more with the same resources we have? We can't go hire a ton of people. We got to just be a bit more efficient, effective. So I think technology really is a key to that. And I think on one hand, the experimentation piece, I think, is important. I mean, all the stuff with Gen AI and AI and all that coming through, I think it's important to understand that is going to lead to a lot of productivity improvements down the line. It's not a silver bullet today, but it could be in a few years, and it's going in that direction. So I think when selecting software, when looking at the technology, have those considerations of, where is the company on their roadmap with respect to investing in AI? What is that going to look like? Will this be something we can leverage down the road? I think that part is quite good. And then the other part is, with all the extra infrastructure spend and call it scrutiny on that, there's a lot of new requirements that pop up, right? So, take like ESG reporting in terms of carbon emissions or whatever, like it's a new sort of set of things that have to be tracked. Right. And what we try to tell clients is, instead of, as these new requirements come up, because they will come up, your process will change, don't try and solve it at the time with a point solution, but instead, if you're going to pick a PMIS platform, think about the scalability aspect of it. And as process evolves, or as new requirements come up, can this platform also address that without, a huge lift, a huge upgrade, et cetera? So, so you do want to some degree try and future-proof your vendor or your technology selection a bit, and Plug to Kahua, I think it's one of those platforms you can actually scale up. So it's definitely considerations that we recommend to clients.
All right, last question, then we're going to get a few rapid fires from our audience. Stephen, I'll start with you on this one. We talk a lot at Kahua about the crawl, walk, run approach, and you mentioned that earlier in one of your answers. So I'm going to start with you. What's your advice about phasing rollouts? We often say, find a quick win, build some momentum, Don't try to eat the whole cake at one time, but find a good win, build some momentum, then do the next good thing and the next good thing and the next good thing. Is there a time when that's not appropriate, when you should just try to roll out a lot of stuff in one big phase? What's your kind of take on that?
Well, I mean, I think you should always do some type of phase rollout. Giving somebody too much too fast can just be overwhelming. You'll get more resistance that way. And then, like you were saying, I think it was David was saying earlier, with go into these projects expecting 80% correct, and you're gonna have to fix some stuff along the way. If you dump something too fast on people, they're going to be more resistant. They're going to be more hesitant, and you're going to have a lot of issues. So I don't think that's really the best recipe for success, unless it's a necessity. You have to have this PMI system implemented today, tomorrow, next week. It's the best one on the market. You think it's great, or you have a very small team. If I have a team of 5 and I'm implementing something, that's an afternoon in a classroom teaching them how to use the system, and we're all briefed. If you're talking about something like GSA, that's not going to work. I think the crawl, walk, run phase that we did there at GSA was extremely successful. When we came in, we started off, with simple things. Hey, just touch the system. That's what it felt like. It was like, just touch it. Let's put some information into the system, understand how it works, understand how everything works together, understand how your projects are going to be presented. Nothing too overwhelming. We're not going to, have you throw everything in there. You can keep using your systems, but understand that this is what's coming. Get them curious about it. And we started doing more demos. Hey, this is what it's going to be able to do. This is where you're looking at the future. So they could see what's coming up and kind of get excited for that launch. I couldn't honestly tell you a good time that I would tell you to just, step on the gas and then throw it all at everybody, besides if you have a smaller team that can handle that, or if they're ready for it, So
David McGid, would you add anything to that? Or do you have a different take on that?
Well, I mean, I like bite-sized chunks as well. I think that's the best way to ease into a new system. Some people don't have that liberty because they might be cutting over or cutting off an old legacy system. So, but even for those that have that situation, just keep in mind that it's hard for end users to take on a huge change or shock to their system all at once. So wherever possible, phased approach is what we like to promote, and we see better success from those organizations that are able to implement a phased approach.
All right, excellent, guys.
I totally agree.
Go ahead, Rich. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say I totally agree, and I tend to like to try and keep my blood pressure down. And the Big Bang approach doesn't do that, so we definitely try and stay away from that. But the only thing I would add is in a lot of cases too, we sort of separate the release of functionality with the deployment to stakeholder groups. You don't have to do it all. Deploy it to add value to particular groups. They'll get good at it. If the release goes well, they'll talk about it. It'll get momentum internally in the organization. You could add more functionality, deploy it to the next group, and build a plan like that. It tends to go much better.
All right, excellent, guys. This has been fantastic. I really appreciate you guys being with us. We have just a couple minutes left. I'd like to get to a couple rapid fire questions. And thank you, audience, for putting your questions in the Q&A. We will do our best to get answers to all these, to everyone who submitted a question, even if it has to be after this presentation. We'll reach out and try to answer your question. So, rapid fire, 10 seconds or less. Actually, let's start with a one-word answer. Here's the first rapid fire question, and it is, when you think of a failed tech rollout, what usually comes to mind first? The tech, the people, or the process? David?
People.
Rich?
People, but the system gets blamed.
And Stephen?
People as well.
All right, excellent, guys. Next question. This is a 10-second answer. What's one of the most common mistakes you see when teams roll out new tech? David?
Common mistakes is, again, kind of the Big Bang approach, like everything all at once.
Rich?
Not iterating, not really paying attention to process, not our stakeholders, and ultimately not defining the why are we doing this at the beginning.
All right, Stephen?
I think end user involvement, not having them get a buy-in to what their change is going to be.
All right, last rapid fire. And then we're going to turn it back over to Ansley. But thanks, guys. Here, one more 10-second answers. Stephen, we're coming to you again. What's one quick win a team can get after adopting a new platform that proves the value right away? Give us a quick win.
Quick win? I mean, I would just publish it, show everybody how it worked. Your road to success.
Rich, one quick win a team can get.
Easier to respond to if you define what the benefits are going into the implementation that you're trying to achieve. If it's adoption metrics, if it's compliance metrics, after you go live, if you achieved them, it's pretty obvious. But the key thing you do want to define what you're trying to achieve, what the benefit before you start. Then this question becomes easy to answer.
Yep. David.
I'd say right after the decision is made, hold a town hall, provide a PowerPoint with the reasons why you chose the technology, and give a short demonstration of some of the cool things that people can expect when the technology rolls out.
Excellent. All right, gentlemen, thanks so much. This has been helpful. Hopefully it's been helpful to our audience. Ansley, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Thank you all for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you on our next Kahua webinar.